In my experience, it's become common for buyers to include a personal letter addressed to the seller when submitting an offer to purchase a home. It is certainly not a requirement, but of course, many buyers hope that this letter will help them secure a contract to purchase the home under favorable terms. There are a few benefits and likewise some credible disadvantages that I want to discuss when making a choice whether to write a letter or not. And I'll start with a few benefits. At times, sellers have an emotional connection to their property, and they want to see it fall into good hands. So a buyer's letter can be written with the intent of making that case. A buyer's letter can explain a buyer's unique circumstances intended to result in an empathetic appeal for the seller to accept their offer. A buyer's letter can be written to identify common interests between the buyer and the seller to build trust. A letter can detail the intended use of a property by a buyer in order to differentiate themselves in a way that is more appealing for a seller. And finally, a letter can also help explain any unique terms in their offer or details about financing that might not otherwise get through to the seller in a productive way between the buyer agent and the listing agent. Now let me discuss some of the disadvantages to consider. At the top of the list is the Fair Housing Act, which prohibits discrimination in housing because of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and disability. So when a buyer provides a letter detailing any of this information to a seller, it could increase the chance that the seller discriminates against the buyer or other competing buyers due to these protections. So don't do that. Another concern is that the letter may reduce the buyer's negotiating leverage by sharing their feelings about a property in the letter, leading to the sellers decreasing their willingness to negotiate. Also, a letter expressing shared interests between the buyer and the seller may make the seller feel that their personal space has been violated. Another concern is that a buyer letter in sharing their unique circumstances may give a seller information to use as leverage against the buyer in their negotiations. Also, a buyer letter can provide information that provokes the seller into doing more research about a buyer that could detract from the sale. In other words, a buyer letter can undercut your power during negotiations. It could make the seller feel uncomfortable, and it could bias the seller. My personal experience is across the board, where a buyer letter has been a difference maker. It's been net neutral and not helpful at all. In other words, carefully consider your circumstances, and if you choose to write a letter, be sure to understand your risks and have realistic expectations of the possible outcomes.